Okay, when you're given a recognition or a compliment or an award, the first thought, feeling should be a feeling of being unworthy. And then the second thought and action is to accept it anyway. And that's carried with me for a long time. So appreciate the kind words. I'm just a guy that's been here a long time. I'm going to give you a little history, but first a little bit about me. I'm Doug Brush. The way I introduce myself in the spiritual life group says I'm Doug and I'm a sinner.
Hey, Doug.
And that's the way of proclaiming my faith. And I use this book. If you don't have this, it's the best book I've ever had. It's called the Serenity Bible, Companion to the 12 Steps. It relates the 12 steps of recovery to Scripture. And it's a way I can relate my faith with the men and women we treat with stuff that relates to the 12 steps, which, if you know the spiritual principles behind the 12 steps, are wonderful principles. And I'll put them on the board and I'll say, oh, okay, guys, what of those would you not like to have in your life? One they don't like a lot is responsibility, which is step 9. But that's down the road. So I'm Doug Rush. I'm a sinner. I'm not in recovery from alcohol and drug addiction, but I'm in recovery from living. And I work the 12 steps every day of my life because it's made me a better Christian. It's a simple set of tools to use, which are wonderful. The best I've ever found to learning how to live differently in my life. So a little history. MARR started in 1975. Donnie Brown was the founder. He was the son of a Methodist minister and a teetotaler. You know what that is?
That's right.
Has never tasted alcohol. He wrote in his master's program at Oklahoma State University as a vocational rehab counselor, the design for the therapeutic community at MARR. Putting 6 people around a dining room table and helping them learn how to break bread and eat and share and trust each other through a longer term residential process. That was his vision. So that opened 75. He opened up MARR with a $400 loan from the Decatur DeKalb Optimist Club and support from his church family at Clarkson United Methodist Church. They were the original volunteers. Yeah, pretty amazing. That was Briarcliff Out, which was across the street from DeKalb Addiction Center and GMHI back then. And some of you may not know the history, but GMHI and DeKalb Addiction Center was the national place for people to come to learn how to be alcohol and drug counselors way back in the 60s. We're now Fox. Some of the folks that were founders in the treatment industry. People came to Atlanta. That's how Donnie came to Atlanta. That's how Dr. Talbot came to Atlanta from Ohio, was to come through that training and begin setting up programs here in Georgia. So just a little bit of history. Boyd Whaley is really the designer of what became the Centers of Ministry approach that MARR used in our early years. Boyd was a Methodist minister with a PhD in Old Testament studies. And he came to MARR about the same time I did. By the way, I came to work at MARR in 1978, part-time, and then full-time in 1981. So I'm kind of the kid that came along for the ride around all these wonderful mentors. Dr. Talbot, Donnie Brown, George Dominic at DAC, Gary Dyes, who was one of the original staff members, Boyd Whaley. And Boyd Whaley's design was, how do we integrate treatment with the recovery community, with the church community? How do we design that? And he came up with the concept of the Centers of Ministry for a couple of reasons. Seth talked about it. The church community early on helped us bring acceptance and remove the negative focus around addiction and alcoholism in our community. So as churches became involved with us, part of what we got in return was congregations accepting our people, our men and women, who they were, and giving them permission to live in their community. But it was also an opportunity to begin to train churches, because Seth said churches didn't know what to do. They still don't know what to do. And a lot of the churches that reached out to us were ones that had identified addicts in their church congregation and said, we don't know what to do with it. Right? In fact, Southwest Christian Church, one of our first centers ministry, had an addicted nurse in their congregation they didn't know what to do or how to help her. And so their initial reach out to us was, what do we do? So it allowed to find acceptance from the church communities for us to move into communities, but also gave us the opportunity to educate and train churches on how to deal with people in need in their own congregation. Third thing it did was it helped us to train volunteers from the community and from the church community to learn how to unconditionally love addicts and alcoholics. It's hard to do. One of the reasons we do our spiritual life groups in Sunday school classes at churches is if you read about step 2 and the conflict and the struggle recovering folks have with God because of shame, hypocrisy, condemnation in their experiences with the church. One of the reasons we have the groups in churches is so they can begin to work through some of that conflict. You get that? We could do spiritual life groups here, and it would be like recovery groups, right? But the reason we do them at churches is because they got to walk through a church door and go, yeah, I'm not ready for this. I'm still angry. I still got all this shame, or maybe I wasn't churched at all. What does all this mean, right? So I'll give you a story as we talk about this. Jeff C., alumni from 1984, 85. He finally made it to MARR, and we told him he had to go to the spiritual life group at a local church. I do that. So he had to, because he's in MARR. So he came every Monday night, and he would close his eyes and hum for the entire hour. The entire hour. You're not coming in. You're not coming in. The only problem was we had trained 9 or 10 members of that church to sit in that group, and 4 or 5 of them were church ladies. And it was a room with one door going out of the Sunday school class, and nobody got out of that room after the group without a hug from those church ladies. Without a hug. And Jeff stayed with us for a year. Eventually he quit humming and doing that. When he graduated, he moved and took a job in New York City, and he always arranged his business trip back to Atlanta so he could stay over on Monday night to get his hug. Now that's spirituality, right? So one of the differences is we don't do spiritual life groups in churches to teach religion or doctrine. We do it because we believe that spirituality is this. Spirituality is relational. Relationship with self, with others, and with God. So it's a relational process, and that's what we try to teach in the spiritual life groups is moving away from doctrine to a relational experience, which they talk about in step 2. And so that's what we try to help our men and women engage in, is experiencing the relational process with each other as they begin to struggle through what God's going to look like in their life. Right? So, and it's amazing what happens in those groups when they come in without having it, or we have the overzealous Christian who hides behind Christianity. You've seen that, where all of a sudden, they're just gonna, and that's the way we hide it. We hide in a lot of different ways, right? And part of treatment recovery is to help people not have to hide. Right? Now, the second thing I'll tell you was when we did training, most of the volunteers that came to work as volunteers at MARR came because they wanted to help. Right? I want help. And when we do volunteer training, I say, that's not gonna work. I don't know if one of the things I love about early recovering addicts and alcoholics is that they know if you're authentic or if you're not. Because they've been through pain, loss, suffering, everything. So they know if you have authenticity, or if you're just someone trying to help, right? So when we would train volunteers and they'd say, well, I just want to help. I said, well, let me tell you what's gonna happen. If you come in and introduce yourself and you say, I'm here to help, they're gonna say, next, right? We don't need your help, right? So we did a lot of advanced training. Boyd did, I did, Donnie did, helping our volunteers who were coming to help understand what they were coming there for themselves. Addicts and alcoholics understand that. If you're coming to get something for yourself, they get that. What they don't get is if you're coming to help them, right? So a lot of the training in the early years and still now is asking volunteers that are going to integrate into the treatment experience, whether men and women, what it is they're here for. Not to help, but what are you, why would you pick an alcohol and drug treatment center to come volunteer in from a church program? So we help them learn about that. So I'll give you another story. Carrie was a member of the church that I belong to called St. John United Methodist Church, and one of our longest running spiritual life centers. He was probably 65, maybe 70. We did a celebration recovery service at that church one Sunday morning, which is pretty interesting. We've done a lot of celebration recovery services at churches where they're not just providing a coffee pot and a place to meet on Thursday night. It's cool when they actually invite a group of recovering alcoholics addicts into their congregation on Sunday morning and focus on the message of hope and healing of recovery. Terry experienced one of those morning celebration recovery services, and he came to me afterwards and said, Doug, I'd really like to volunteer at MARR. Terry was probably close to 70 at the time. I said, really, Carrie? So he came to the volunteer training, and when I would ask, what brings you here? I want to help. I want to do this. I want to help somehow. No, why did you become attracted to a program like MARR to sit in a group with recovering addicts, alcoholics? He said this. When I was 16 years old, my father was an alcoholic, and my uncle let me come live with him so I could finish high school, so I could join the army. That was in 1940. And when he finished high school and went off to join the army, he asked his uncle, what can I ever do to repay you? And in 1940, his uncle said, help an alcoholic someday. Now that's genuine. That's authentic. And when he told that story to the men in that spiritual life group, he became like an uncle or grandpa to those men struggling with addiction and with spiritual recovery. So what we ask volunteers to do when you work with churches is to learn how to be authentic, to share who you are and share your experience in your faith, and to learn how to listen. Learn how to listen. That's the only things we ask our volunteers to do is learn how to listen, be authentic, be unconditional in their love and acceptance of people in early recovery, and to not fix. Because codependent volunteers want to fix, right? They want to make things go away, help. No, they just want you to be with us. And so that was really a founding principle of embracing and engaging churches in bringing what I would call a wider circle of acceptance to a client's treatment experience. When someone comes in treatment, we're supposed to accept them because we're trained, and we're supposed to be non-judgmental and accepting and that kind of stuff. And when they go to 12-step meetings, they're supposed to be accepted there because alcoholics got to do that to stay sober themselves, right? Okay. But what do you do when you walk into a church door and totally afraid of feeling accepted out there in the community at large? So the other reason we created the spiritual life center's ministry was to give our clients that wider circle of a sense of acceptance before they went home. Because, you know, our clients go home and then they got to deal with, what do we tell people when we get home? Where were you? Who are you? What happened? All that kind of stuff. And that experience of having a wider circle of acceptance and unconditional love has been powerful through the years. As people have experienced hope and healing and moving through the spiritual principles of recovery. So those are the founding beliefs of why we started Centers of Ministry, what the churches have done for us, because in a sense, it was that the plan was to do this, right? Treatment, AA. Well, let me change that. Community, which included church. No, I don't know if that makes sense to you, but try to integrate all those three together to create a holistic spiritual experience and recovery experience for men and women. Well, hope that makes sense to you. And the key was helping us all learn how to be more authentic and real and genuine in our relationships, spiritual relationships with each other, so that maybe we can give hope to those struggling with that conflict and that struggle in their life. Right. So one other story, Chris was from Texas and he came to MARR, and for the first 4 weeks, he would put his head down in the spiritual life group and you could hear him say, I'm bad at it. Total shame, total self-centeredness, total everything, right? Just, and so finally, about the 4th week, I was leading the spiritual life group at a church. And I said, Chris, you self-centered son of a bleep. You're gonna have to come up a rung. He looked at me. I said, that rung's already taken. The Apostle Paul has that spot. You're gonna have to come up a rung. I told him Paul was the worst of the worst, a sinner, a blasphemer, a murderer, and an insolent man. But he even in that scripture had to come up to give hope to those to follow. And I said, if you're gonna give hope to those to follow, you're gonna have to come up a rung and decide if you want to give hope or stay down there, because you can't have that spot. That's already taken. Yeah, and that's what we do, is try to give people an opportunity to come up the rung. Learn that it's not about them, but it's about giving hope to those to follow. Right. Yeah. Oh, the last thing, and Jeff will tell you this, and Ted, all the time I'm telling the men, you know, we're really just looking for a few men that want to learn how to wait. Learn how to wait. I had a doctor once at Ridgey that did the first 3 steps, and then he said, so now what do I do? Just sit on the sofa? Wait, no. Now it's time to take action. But we're looking for a few good men and women that want to just learn how to wait and quit looking at their scope and look at God's plan. Okay. Yeah. So the idea of integrating the community along with treatment, along with AA, creates a wider circle of acceptance that hopefully clients get to experience as they learn how to accept themselves and give hope to others. That's kind of some of the history. I probably left a few things out. I would recommend that you get one of these. I have some back there. You're welcome to take one. I'll read one piece of it that I read to the guys all the time. In the step 1 piece on this, it gives a marvelous talk of the spiritual cycle of addiction. Okay. And what would you guys guess is the core issue in addiction and the disease? If you had to think about it.
Hole in your heart, maybe.
Cause pain.
Selfishness.
Pain. Yeah. Pain. And from an early age, we've learned ways to try to salve that pain, right? Whether it's alcohol and drugs, sex, work, achievement, money, spending. If I can just buy more, I'll fill that, whatever that is, right? So it says in here that pain is the core. And you can throw in loss and loneliness and all that kind of stuff, but pain. And we've been filling that for a long time with everything except our relationship with God, right? So it says examples like work, food, yeah, food's a big one. Sex, alcohol, or dependent relationships to salve our pain. And we see that all the time, right? Happens in our lives, right? And we keep trying to salve it. And I always tell the men and women, it's right there, 2 fingers above the belly button, and it's supposed to be there. Because part of learning how to have pain is to have it without making it go away, right? Part of the spiritual process. But when we salve it, that creates temporary anesthesia. Okay. Making it go away. We get unconscious, which we wake up to negative consequences. How many clients have you heard that would just like to learn how to drink and drug without having negative consequences, right? Yeah, if I could just figure that out, then that'd be good. But we'll wake up to negative consequences, and I tell them this, and then we feel shame and guilt, and I say, hopefully, we feel shame and guilt. Because Big Book talks about those that are incapable, right? Constitutionally incapable. And then that creates more pain. And that's the addiction cycle. And the goal is not to make the pain go away, it's to embrace the pain and learn how to live with it and work through it to a place of wellness and well-being. So the goal of the spiritual life groups is not to evangelize or to proselytize, it's to shepherd. That's the goal of our spiritual life groups, is to be good shepherds. You know, be authentic, to be real, because they know whether you have it or don't have it. Whether you're just one of their parents that told them what to do and do what I say, not as I do, you know, or if there's something different going on that they maybe can begin to trust and have hope for. That's spirituality, guys. And so that's what we do. I'll read one last thing. Understanding the addiction cycle is important because it helps explain why for both the Oxford group, which was the group for AA, and for Bill Wilson, the admission of powerlessness is the first step to recovery. And then I add this, otherwise we remain caught. You know what that feels like? Remain caught. Admission of powerlessness is the first step to recovery. Otherwise, we remain caught. And people in early recovery understand that feeling caught. I understand that feeling caught. Then it says this, if we rely on willpower alone, then the only thing we know to do is to escalate our addiction to get out of the pain. Unless there's a change that begins, all we know how to do is to escalate that behavior addiction to get out of the pain. Right? I got a guy in right now that's just, oh God, he's so gung ho. Talk about all things he's already learning and doing. And when he's not half with you, I said, man, I'm tired. Man, dude, I'm tired hearing all that stuff. And so what I told him was that the step one calls us to do less, to yield, to surrender, and to let go. No, we got to do more, right? That's how we're taught, to do more. Somehow figured out, you know, and we live in a world where we're supposed to do more, right? And you talked about overwhelmed. I believe the churches are overwhelmed right now. You can see it. I mean, there's just so much to deal with. You know, when I started at MARR, we didn't have these.
So a lot of stuff has
You know, my own personal preference, you know why I have this? You know why I have this?
Is that a page? What is it?
Oh, it's a flip phone. You know why I have this purposely in my life? So I can do less.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I can spend more time listening and talking cause I've failed at that, you know. And so, that's one of the reasons I have that. I think the other thing is, Jim Dyer taught me a long time ago. Part of spirituality and recovery is helping people feel valued. And that requires stopping and pausing and taking a moment with our clients and with the people we have the privilege to be with, but just taking a moment. Just being in relationship. So I don't know, any questions? I do want to share one other thing. There's some other books over there I'd recommend that you read. How many have read anything by Henry Nouwen? The Wounded Healer, Return of the Prodigal Son? They're wonderful reads if you're, because we don't do a good job taking care of ourselves. Okay, we want to think we have boundaries and that we don't take stuff home and that we're, but we're the containers of our clients' feelings and losses and shame and trauma, and that takes its toll. And so if we're going to be authentic and genuine, we have to deal with that in our own life and how it affects us. Donnie used to ask me 2 questions early on when I go do a group. I had no idea what I was doing. Okay. And I'd come back for supervision and he'd say, did you feel like you were going to lose control in group? And I didn't know what he was talking about. And he'd say, did anybody scare you or threaten you? Did you feel scared in group? Had no idea what he was talking about. Then we had this doctor from Houston show up that had taken 17 police to restrain him in a psychotic episode. And when I went into the first group, he had those eyes. You ever seen that person with those eyes? Okay, I mean, intense eyes. And I went running to Donnie's office and they said, okay, now I felt out of control in group and he scared me. What do I do? And Donnie asked me this one question. So let me ask you something. Do you respond? Do you react out of your head, out of your emotions, or out of your gut? And our job is to learn how to respond, not react. Because if we react, we're just recreating their family of origin stuff. They're going to project anger on us. And if we get angry back at them, we just, they're good to go then. Our job is to work through that feeling, thought, how do I respond? So that we don't recreate the response they're looking for in their addiction and give them hope for healing and changing their life. So if you don't hear anything else, supervision, learn about your own spirituality. I would guess most of you do a lot of work on that in here in terms of who you are and who are you in a relationship with others and with God, so that you can be a person that responds, not a person that reacts. So when I retired after Patrice, how long was it? I retired January of 2020. So I guess that was 42 years then. And I went back into therapy for about 6 months to deal with all of that stuff. 42 years of containing stuff. Yeah. And that's important. And we have to learn how to do that if we're going to be spiritually available to those that we treat. So a couple of the books over there, 12 and 12. I mean, this has a wonderful narration on all the different steps, particularly step 2 about the struggle. The 12 and 12 is a wonderful book in terms of looking at spiritual recovery in our clients. A couple other books, anything by Henry Nouwen is very good for healing of ourselves. There's a book called The Servant over there, which is one of the best leadership books I've ever read about spiritual leadership, servanthood. And there's a couple other things over there. What'd I leave out?
Eldridge.
Don Eldridge, a great, year-long devotional.
Brent Surveying.
Yes, yeah. Ragamuffin gospel.
Doug, can I share something?
Yeah.
with us? So it's really interesting for me because, I went through MARR. So then to hear about like really like from the staff perspective, and maybe y'all relate to this too, like why we go to spirituality at church, like what the things we do. So it's like things like, I never thought about it that way. Like I never thought, but I'm so grateful because for my spiritual life experience, when I came to MARR, I was like, as long as I don't have to go anywhere near Tucker, Georgia, I'm totally fine. Totally fine. We're in Lawrenceville, as long as, so they're like, oh, but guess what? Your spiritual life group is in Tucker, Georgia, at Tucker United Methodist Church. Just don't want to be in that town. I don't want to be in that place. And we had this volunteer, Don, and his wife volunteered with our group. And I was at MARR for probably about 9 months. And at about 9 months, I was really struggling financially, really struggling with all these things. And Don approached me after a spiritual life group one night, and he was like, I've been praying about this for a month, and I've been thinking about these things. He's like, and I've watched you, and I've watched your relationship. I've watched you coming here and what you changed, what you talked about from the beginning, and what you're talking about now. And he was like, my company's hiring for an accounts receivable person, a receptionist. Like, we really would love to like give you a chance to like, I'm so grateful because I hadn't have had someone from the outside world who had been a part of my journey from the very beginning. Like, it was like, obviously a God moment. It was such a God thing for me. And it wasn't someone from the rooms. It was just somebody who was showing up for spiritual life group, and he was part of my journey. And to be honest, like at that time, I didn't even think those people that were volunteering even thought about me after they left that group at night.
Right, yeah, and what amazing transition to mean they want a person like me in their place of work. Yeah, they only knew, right?
Right,
Yeah.
and he knew.
Yeah,
He knew
yeah,
it all.
yeah. And a lot of the clients, when they go in spiritual life groups, all they think of when they go home at night, the first couple of weeks, they say, yeah, they're just here to hear our stories. They get their kicks out of hearing their stories. And over the time of 90 days and longer, it's like, oh, they're here because they have struggles with spirituality also. Yeah, they struggle too. And they're church earth people.
Right.
Right. And they have the same struggles we have. And that's so important with building hope and healing. And being a part of not just treatment and AA, but a part of the community at large. And why would they pick someone like me if they really knew who I was? And we all have that, right? They really knew who I was. If they really knew who I was, Donnie Brown wouldn't have hired me 45 years ago. I guarantee that. But somehow he did. So, well, yeah. Questions? I don't know if this prompted anything for y'all or gave you a different outlook or look at why we do stuff within our communities, but it's crucial. So, yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So with the experience you have, eventually, some of us may start going outside the bubble of faith leaders, churches that are sort of welcoming and can get it. We might encounter one who either is sort of standoffish or either just doesn't know. So whether they're neutral or sort of in opposition, what's your advice on how to communicate to a leader of a church that it's okay to get to know a collaboration like this and start a relationship? Like, what is your experience tell you to teach us about ways to build that relationship?
First thing I tell them is, by the way, Pastor, 10% of your congregation are struggling with alcohol and drug use. At least. You may not know it, but there's a need. Would be the first thing. It really helps if you have a pastor who is really committed to looking at brokenness and recovery as a ministry in their congregation. It's really tough. Jim Dyer was our first spiritual life group, and he took a lot of heat from the elders there for opening up his church, a recovery ministry there. And that was 50 years ago, 45 years ago. But then it became just a gift and a mainstay of their congregation. Yeah. the North Atlanta Church of Christ, I mean, talk about a church that has opened their doors to recovery. My goodness, you know, they don't care if the carpets are dirty or if they gotta replace stuff. They're there to serve the recovery community. It's amazing to watch. So I think the first thing is raising their awareness with education that you have people here suffering. That can't talk about it because they're, even though Seth, you said they tend to first go to their church. A lot of people, won't go to their church, they'll go to another place, another church, because they're scared of how they'll be received in their church community. So, another question? Yeah.
So this may be a personal issue, but I have found that as I've gotten further and further into my spirituality and my recovery, I like church less and less. In lieu of church, I do that Sunday morning Bible study that we do that focuses on the Serenity Bible. But I find the dogma and the inflexibility in church to be annoying. And I don't know, does anybody else grapple with that? And if so, how do I deal with that? Even my Bible study that I do on Tuesday mornings, they're so rigid and they're so arrogant about their faith. You know, and they pity those that aren't in that Bible study. And I don't like, they're some of my closest friends in the world, but I don't like that.
And that's what our patients experience coming in the doors of treatment. Yeah. Even the ones that grew up in a church, how do I resolve and come to peace with that? Yeah. We have another client who grew up in a very traditional Baptist church, and he's played piano in the choir and sang, and he's gay. And he was finally able to tell his parents in family week at MARR that he was gay. Yeah, and now he goes back home when he goes home and plays the piano at his church that he grew up in. But it took a lot of work to get there. So I don't know what to tell you in terms of how to maneuver that or work your way into something. If you want to become active in a church community again. Not sure what to tell you in that other than find a church that is dealing with their own brokenness.
I mean, I was very active in my church when I was drinking, but in all the wrong ways. I was chairman of the building committee. I was building buildings, you know, and I thought, well, look at this building I built. And I was on the administrative council. I was on the finance committee, I did all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I thought that was sort of my entrance to heaven because I knew what was going on in my life. But that was doing more, not less.
Right,
in that
right,
situation.
right.
That doesn't do it for me.
Right.
Part of my experience was kind of the same. Like I would volunteer for everything.
Yeah.
Well, I was on every committee in
And I was what's referred to as a sipper, so I was consuming alcohol all day, every day. And I'm still, you know, working with kids in the, you know, communities. Just wasting a long time, but in my mind, it's the justification. Look at all the good that I'm doing. But as I've gone along, to kind of answer your question, at least from my perspective, I have to find more authenticity. Why do I believe what I believe? Is it because that's what my church believes? Is it because that's how I was raised? And so you pick and choose. I know Hope Pussy spent a lot of time this week at people in ministry, maybe even ask these questions. And I always challenge my guys to say, hey, ask those difficult questions about what you believe. Jesus had a lot of questions. You know?
Yeah.
And then what I found is that I had a long time ago let my faith plateau. I was no longer trying to grow. I knew everything I needed to know. I believed what I believed and felt very justified and almost spiritually arrogant about myself.
That's exactly right.
And I've moved to a place where I want to continue to question these things. Because I know that I'll never have it all figured out. I get environments where the church is not doing it. But I take what I feel like I need for me. I choose to participate in a church that has a format that I like. Mainly old hymns being sung on a little electric organ in a small town. But this is what I prefer. Other people have other preferences. But what am I contributing to my recovery by investing in either a Bible study or a Sunday school or particular faith community? What am I continuing to learn? How is that allowing my faith to evolve and grow and stretch its limit?
Yes. And then go along with what you were saying, I had to learn to change my expectations of what I expected from the church, because I'm going to church and learning from another man, you know, what God is all about. And he's in the process of learning himself. So we're all learning together, and now I am understanding that he doesn't know everything because we are not supposed to. And it's a learning process, and as you say, we take what we need and go to church expecting God to give us something out of that thing, and not demanding it at the pulpit for God to give us something out of that service that we can leave with.
It's like that moment where you realize mom and dad didn't know everything. The pastor didn't know everything. Maybe I can come to some conclusions myself.
But what I find in this room, or in rooms like this, often my conversations with other people are indeed conversations with God. That God often speaks to me through other people when we are together trying to work through an issue. What I find in the church is that the other person is talking to me. They do know what they're talking about. They are an expert and they're telling me, you know, and I just don't respond well. I happen to be an alcoholic. But I don't like being told what I should think or what I should do or how I feel. And I find that a lot in the really devout people who have risen up to positions of authority in the church, whether they be lay people or clergy. They feel like they've got a better connection, stronger. The stronger. They're hearing it directly from God.
It's authoritative.
Exactly.
God's glory is love, it's not power.
Right.
And he just is a neighbor. How am I walking? That's what I love about the Kirsten Ford movie. It's neighboring. We're walking side by side. It's not about me dragging you where I think you need to go.
Agreed. I just struggle with that.
Yeah. I'll help you
I'm
with
with
this.
you.
Authority has nothing to do with telling someone what to do. Authority has to do with knowing who you are and being able to be in relationship with others. I think I'm just gonna close with this. It's a reading out of this book about powerlessness, because that's what we get to deal with, right? We should not be fearful that powerlessness will result in passivity. On the contrary, to admit powerlessness is to subordinate our human wills to God's will so that we can become the most effective and potent instruments we were created to be. A talks about purpose, service. This talks about being the most potent and effective instruments that God created to be. That's hope, right? Yeah. Yeah, so that's how I kind of close with the guys is, does that sound like something you would like to have in your life, and how do you prepare? So anyway, thanks for letting me talk. I hope it was helpful. It's great to be with you all. And good to be with you today, and thanks, Seth. I'll turn it back over. Yeah.
Thank you.